of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards our honesty when we're in a difficult situation. And I wanted to take a very particular angle to this. So let me frame it, inshallah ta'ala, in sort of a personal discussion that I was having this morning with someone that's experiencing an extreme amount of financial difficulty. And obviously, many people, in particularly the COVID-19 era, are experiencing financial hardship for the very first time, or at least for the first time in a very long time, in this way. And as people start to experience financial hardship, and it's actually a paper that, inshallah, I'm working on alongside Sister Najwa and Sister Sarah Sultan, with the mental health as well as the faith element to it, as how we deal with financial uncertainty. As people start to experience financial uncertainty, like many forms of uncertainty, certain options become available to them and certain things open up for them that might not have been open to them before. And I want to preface this by saying that there are legitimate fatwas, for example, legitimate scholarly opinions, for example, that if a person finds themselves in this situation, then they're able to, out of necessity, engage in this particular type of financial transaction, which otherwise would be prohibited. That necessity makes things that are ordinarily prohibited permissible in a restricted sense, right? And one of the problems is that people usually go beyond the restricted to the moment, and they just kind of go far into it. And this is very much so embedded in our legal reasoning as Muslims, that there are certain hardships that make things permissible that ordinarily would be prohibited. But I want to take this beyond that, and I want us to just sort of think about it as an attitude, as a mindset. A person who has this quality that is referred to in our text as iffa, as modesty. Modesty, typically when discussed in the spiritual sense, refers to modesty in regards to probably the way that many of us think of it, iffa, and protecting oneself from zina and everything that leads to zina, protecting oneself from adultery, fornication, and guarding one's chastity. But it also refers to staying away from haram money and not finding ourselves in a situation where we are engaging in prohibited forms of transaction. And so just as when a person is in a place of affluence and they're gaining a lot and they have a lot of money, for example, and they're in a place of luxury and they see that there's a way to do extra, to gain extra, and so they'll engage in some prohibited transactions because they've tasted the sweetness of wealth and prosperity, and so I might as well keep increasing. Likewise, there's a unique hardship, a unique way of a person finding themselves in a way that they could be tempted to haram when they're in a difficult situation. And so typically when we talk about as-sara wa ad-dara, when we talk about hardship and ease, we talk about it from the perspective of giving sadaqah, for example, in hardship and ease. الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises the people that spend both in times of adversity and in times of prosperity. But there's something to be said about a person who holds on to their principles and does not lose them in a situation of hardship and in a situation of particularly the pinch of financial hardship. And this is where we find so much in our text about this idea of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewarding a person for their honesty. وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. That whoever is mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make a way out for them, and Allah will provide them from places and with things. Both يَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ will provide him or her from places that they would not have expected before. Okay? So it refers to the source. So you don't know where the khair, where the good is going to come to you. You don't know when it's going to come to you, and you also don't know how it's going to come to you. So both the source of the rizq and the output of the rizq, the source of the sustenance as well as the output of the sustenance, are unknown to you when you choose to practice taqwa, when you choose to practice piety and God consciousness, even in a tight situation, even in a difficult situation. وَمَنْ يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. And whoever entrusts Allah with all of their affairs, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be sufficient for that person in regards to everything. Okay, in regards to everything. Now again, I'm going to say this one more time. There are situations where a person finds himself in a darura, in a hardship, and there is a legitimate fatwa and a pathway where a person has to engage in something that is ordinarily prohibited for the sake of getting themselves out of a difficult situation. And so, you'll find that this is gradual, and you'll find that it is both on the basis of how difficult your situation is and whether or not you've exhausted the permissible means to deal with the situation without having to engage in haram. All right. So how much have you exhausted the permissible means in order to not find yourself in a place of engaging in that prohibited transaction or in those prohibited ways? And that's where that taqwa really comes in, right? So taqwa really refers to a sense of being cautious and being safe, particularly when it comes to sins. The famous narration of the companions who described taqwa as a person that's walking between thorny bushes and holding themselves tight so that they don't find themselves being pricked by those thorns. And so they hold themselves tight so that they can remain safe, right? And so that's an attitude, that's a mindset that when a person finds themselves in a situation where things become tempting, where it's easy to go a prohibited route, they ask themselves, have I really exhausted all of the permissible ways to get myself out of this difficulty? They ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help. They ask Allah for support. They exhaust their permissible means to get out of that situation. And then lastly, they only engage the prohibited to the extent that is necessary to get them out of their place of hardship or dire need. I'm going to say that again. They only engage it to a point that it is necessary to get them out of their hardship or their dire need. Because sometimes what happens is that just as you have some people that will sort of skip over the permissible, exhausting the permissible to get themselves out of a hardship, you'll also have some people that will exceed under the umbrella of a fatwa that was given in a very restricted way, will exceed and will just go all the way in. And so if this fatwa allows a person in this situation to engage this much, they'll use that fatwa to justify engaging in this much, right? So where's the taqwa here? The taqwa is not in a person having exhausted all permissible means and then finding themselves in deep hardship and perpetuating that hardship. The taqwa is in whether that person really exhausted their permissible means and really tried to go about things in the purest way possible and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for support in the process. And then engaging only what they had to of the doubtful or what is ordinarily prohibited for that moment. So that's where taqwa is in that regard, right? It's that a person holds back. A person is skeptical, not of the scholar that might give a fatwa for a situation, but a person is skeptical as to whether or not they would qualify for some of the concessions and the exemptions that are given in a hard place.